Well, hello and welcome everyone to this panel discussion on advanced air mobility, jobs and economic impact in Ohio. And this is the fourth event in a series by UC's Office of Research. Thank you all for choosing to be with us here today. I'm excited to be partnering with the Office of Research in welcoming you to this exciting panel discussion. My name is David Adams. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at the University of Cincinnati and the architect of the Cincinnati Innovation District, a connective talent center that serves as a model to transform our cities, organizations, and individuals. The Brookings Institute defines an innovation district as a place where leading edge anchor institutions and companies cluster and connect to solve complex problems. The Cincinnati Innovation District is a unified innovation district, enveloping all the pearls of innovation to broaden its appeal and demonstrate its strength to prospective partners. Some of these pearls are the University of Cincinnati, Cincinnati Children's, and the EPA, and they're all located in close proximity to one another. Firms and workers crave proximity to the most creative institutions so that ideas and knowledge can be transferred more quickly and seamlessly. This work is vitally important because as a country, we continue to be challenged by the divergence of cities between the so-called superstar cities and the rest of us. The Cincinnati Innovation District is focused on creating a place for organizations to gain access to highly skilled talent to transform their businesses. This effort began here at the University of Cincinnati just a few years ago with the model we affectionately named the 1819 Innovation Hub after the year the university was founded. Less than 2 years since its grand opening, the 1819 Innovation Hub is at capacity with startups to Fortune 500 companies. This initial idea has now transformed into a model we call the Cincinnati Innovation District. Unveiled last year by the governor and lieutenant governor, our collective focus is to create 20,000 new jobs and $3 billion in annual economic impact by 2030. It's being fueled by the acceleration of 15,000 STEM graduates and $2 billion in research. It was designed to be a model for the state, the nation, and the world. Already this model is being adopted in our state with the unveiling of the Cleveland Innovation District and the Columbus Innovation District earlier this year. Innovation districts are physically compact, technically wired, and transit accessible. Today's panel discussion around advanced air mobility and the jobs and economic impact on Ohio will be informative and, most importantly, thought-provoking. This is also exciting for me personally, as one of our panelists, Rich Granger with Drive Ohio, just conducted a student hackathon this past weekend focused on air mobility within the Cincinnati Innovation District. The future of advanced air mobility is here. Delivery drones, air taxis, eVTOLs, which are electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, and thank goodness there's an acronym, and more. All these platforms will play an important role in the 21st century, and the cool thing is this. Our panel is going to share why the state of Ohio is uniquely positioned to lead in R&D in this emergent area. Today, they're also going to discuss how this new industry will lead to jobs, positive economic impact, advances in technology, and new knowledge. Earlier, I mentioned that this panel is the fourth in a series called Flashpoint, which was designed and launched by Digital Futures, which is two things. It's a major research initiative of Research 2030, UC's 10-year strategic plan for research, and the nearly 200,000 square foot interdisciplinary research facility being constructed inside the Cincinnati Innovation District. This facility is the central focus of a nearly 600,000 square foot planned development, the Digital Futures Complex. Digital Futures Technology Forward Research Program is going to be a major driver of UC's success moving forward, societal transformation through use-inspired applied research, and the success of the Cincinnati Innovation District as we endeavor to reach our goals. I'd like to give a quick thanks to all the UC staff responsible for logistics, coordination, and support of these events, as well as the event sponsor, the UC Office of Research. And I'd also like to give a personal shout out to Jennifer Kravickas, who's been instrumental in putting all of this together. And with that, I'd now like to introduce our moderator, Jay Chabria, and turn the floor over to him. Jay has served at the highest levels of business and as a senior advisor to former Governor Kasich Currently, Jay is a managing director at Mercury, a global strategy firm, and he's working closely with UC's Office of Research Leadership to scale up their digital futures efforts. And with that, Jay, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, David, for continued support and your collaboration with Digital Futures. Look, it's a wonderful partnership, and it sets the University of Cincinnati apart from other institutions. The work you're doing with the Cincinnati Innovation District, it's really world-class, and I know it's something all of our viewers would appreciate. Welcome everyone to Research Innovation Week. We're finally here in 2021. As David said, the Flashpoint series has showcased UC's research capabilities and how this research actually impacts the real world. This is our fourth conversation in the series, and other panel discussions will be presented to you throughout the day. Today's conversation highlights a brand new industry which portends huge opportunities for our state and, quite frankly, our nation. When I started learning about what advanced air mobility was, I started picturing Back to the Future 2. I started picturing the Jetsons, flying cars everywhere. Well, today we're going to talk about what the opportunities are, what the reality is, and especially how Ohio is well situated to take advantage and create jobs. If you have questions for this panel, please email us at research@uc.edu. That's research@uc.edu. I'm going to go right into it and introduce our esteemed panelists. First, we have Dr. Dan Cupoletti. Dan is currently an assistant professor in aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics department at the University of Cincinnati. He is also an aeroacoustics expert. I just learned what that word was, and his research is going to be critical for Ohio's future in this industry. Elaine Bryant wears multiple hats. She is a managing director of the military and federal sector at Jobs Ohio, the state's private economic development organization. She's also Dayton Development Coalition's executive VP of aerospace and defense. And most important to this conversation, she's leading Ohio's efforts to build out the advanced air mobility industry. Rich Granger is managing director of workforce and economic development at Drive Ohio, which is Ohio's Center for Smart Mobility. Inside of this organization, he is also part of Fly Ohio, which focuses on the very topic at hand. Thank you all for being here. We're going to get right into it. Elaine, I'm going to start with you. As I mentioned in the intro, the Jetsons, Back to the Future 2. What I envision when I hear about advanced air mobility, and I've learned a little bit about it, is flying cars in our horizon. I want you to level set for us. What exactly is advanced air mobility, and what should the average Ohioan expect?
Well, first off, thanks, Jay and Dave, for having me on the panel, and to my colleagues, Rich and Dan as well. Super excited to be here. I know with multiple hats, but one thing is for sure is I have the same passion for this topic, which is advanced air mobility. As you know, Ohio being the the birthplace of aviation, think of that as our first revolution in flight. The jet era is our second revolution, and right now Ohio is poised once again for the third revolution in flight, which is having the ability to hop in your, and I have to use the air quotes, your flying car, for having that opportunity for everyone, not just for certain folks or for getting from LA to New York. Now we have the ability, we are on the forefront of having the ability for us to be able to commute in these vehicles, being able to move goods quicker. I'm sure all of you have learned about package delivery, drone delivery, all of those things. But really what makes Ohio the place for this, and what is this all about? Well, it's about, we have been planning for this, and you can probably argue since the Wright brothers, right? Innovation, technology, our entire state from UC, you heard the great description about the 1819 at the University of Cincinnati, but goes all the way through Wright-Patt, through NASA, through all our institutions. This is where invention happens. This is where we push technology, and this is where we bring those next technologies to bear. And that's the research development and that tech push and pull that we're so good at here in Ohio. But the other thing that we are so good at is the manufacturing piece. So the way I look at it, Ohio is poised not just to attract this new industry, this new way of transportation, this new way of life, frankly, to Ohio, to have it be pushed here, but also we're dealing with, if you think of it, the Henry Fords of flying cars, companies, OEMs that are looking to not only test and build these vehicles, but also industrialize them. So we really want that manufacturing to take hold here in our state. And I think when it comes to that research and development, and it comes to the manufacturing, Ohio is really the place to be. And it's just really exciting to know that this is not just a a one-off in terms of how many folks in Ohio are involved. This is truly a statewide initiative. So your words were kind, Jay, but it's not about me leading it. It is a a statewide initiative, and I will give credit to my ODOT friends. I know Rich is on the panel and he'll speak, but Mr. Fred Judson, and of course our folks at Jobs Ohio as well, and our aerospace, Glenn Richardson and Tim Sweeney, who've been working and setting up our state for many years for exactly this. And now we're poised to take advantage of it. And it's an exciting time.
That's exciting stuff. Dan, I'm going to come to you. We're really trying to set a baseline for our viewers to actually understand what this is. How are these vehicles different than a helicopter or a plane? What are we actually looking at, Dan?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First, thanks for having me on the panel. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. I think many of our viewers are most likely familiar with quadcopters and the types of hobby kind of drones that we've had for the last 10 years or so. And you might notice that they fly much different than a jet aircraft or a helicopter. Jet aircraft require forward motion to generate lift and take off. Helicopters, they generate it from one really large rotor. Really, the enabling technology here is distributed electric propulsion. So having many propellers, anywhere from 4 to 20, that can generate the lift that you need and then generate the forward thrust that you might need to fly forward to get to your destination. You can't go up forever, so you can only go up so far. But the main difference is the propulsion system is distributed across the aircraft. So you can do maneuvers that you couldn't do with a normal helicopter. Most people who've seen helicopters coming into land at Children's Hospital down at UC or anywhere else you've seen them, they're really not, graceful aircraft. They're sort of struggling to stay in the air, and they've got, one big rotor with the capsule hanging from the bottom. When you distribute, the forces on the vehicle, you can have a much more balanced system that can do a lot more interesting maneuvers. They can hover in space, they can turn on a dime, and everything's very stable. And you also have redundancy in the system for safety. So if there's a single point failure, let's say the helicopter rotor, loses power, you don't stay up in the air very long. Whereas if you've got many distributed propulsors, you may be able to sustain losing a few of those and still come down and land safely. We see a lot in the news about helicopter crashes, not to diminish the safety record in aerospace, but I feel that these vehicles are going to have a next level safety record.
That's amazing, and truly something I just learned there too about the safety concerns too. That obviously makes it more appealing for the average consumer of this. Rich, Drive Ohio is the state's efforts around autonomous vehicles. What's the mandate for Fly Ohio?
Sure. Well, thanks, Jay, and thanks, Dave, and everybody for having me here today. So Drive Ohio is the state's Center for Smart Mobility, and as you mentioned, Fly Ohio is part of that. We're twin initiatives of the Ohio Department of Transportation, and just like Elaine said, this is a team sport. So we are designed to reach across all state agencies and further out across industry, universities, communities, partnerships with this alliance model to be the state's hub for smart mobility. So when we're talking about in the air, Fly Ohio, what do we mean by that? Well, we're talking about enabling the infrastructure that's needed. Because when when we talk with students about this, it's this fascinating idea of I want to have a Chipotle burrito delivered. What do I need to do? Well, I'll press those students to say, well, what would you really need to do if you were managing that restaurant? I mean, do you have to hire a drone pilot? Do you have to have a flight plan? I mean, really think about it. What do you need? You need infrastructure, which isn't always, nothing against infrastructure, but it's not the first thing you think about. But what do we mean when we say infrastructure for advanced air mobility? We're talking about air traffic control in the low altitude airspace. If you imagine all these drones buzzing around in larger aircraft, how do we manage all that? Well, we're leaning into that. We've got projects like the Sky Vision system at Springfield Beckley Airport in collaboration with the Air Force Research Lab. We've got other initiatives going in Central Ohio and the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor. So there's a lot of work to be done just to get everything ready. So it's awesome work that we're going to be talking about here that all these innovative air companies are doing. We're getting the infrastructure ready. And then Fly Ohio is not only a team within ODOT, we're an alliance, we're an ecosystem, really, almost a mindset. So it pulls in Jobs Ohio, it pulls in the Ohio Federal Research Network. It pulls in different cities like Springfield and others that we'll talk about. So it's as much a mindset as it is a single organization, and that's what we bring to this conversation.
Do other states, Rich, have setups like what Fly Ohio is conceived to be doing?
To be honest, in the air, I feel like we're pretty unique. I mean,
Yeah.
on the ground, we've seen some movement towards these things that are sort of like Drive Ohio, and other states will have certain versions of that. I mean, in the air, you want my opinion? I think Ohio can be number one in the country. We may already be. We're top three for sure. And
I love it.
we've
No, let's
got
stick
our
with number
lead.
one. Let's stick with the first one. We're number one.
You
That's
got it.
a way to go about it. Dan, I'm going to come to you. I want to actually understand what your research is and how does it apply to this industry?
Yeah, great. Yeah, so my research is sort of in the weeds a little bit, so I'll try to keep it high level here. And there's also some other really good research in the department related to air mobility. My first interest in this area came from, you know, I worked on the East Coast, worked on the West Coast, and I came back to Ohio for a reason, because aerospace is central to this area. But some of my colleagues from the West Coast ended up being hired by Uber, and everybody's pretty familiar with Uber. And I was wondering, why is Uber hiring aerospace engineers? Well, it turned out they were designing concept vehicles and really putting, you know, the marketing forward to try to gain steam behind this air mobility initiative. And I think they were very successful. They recently sold to Joby Aviation, which is building one of these these eVTOL vehicles. But you know, I was skeptical at first when I first, you know, everybody's talking about flying cars and everything's going to be electric. And in general, in aerospace, when you talk about electric, Boeing, Airbus, the big companies say electric can't compete with fuel because you don't have the energy density. There's about 100 times more energy per unit weight in fuel than there is in batteries, so you can't fly as far. Really, the critical you know, hinge point for this technology is that it would be a new market for shorter range flights. So in regional and intercity and intracity sort of transport. And that's where the technology, electric batteries and motors can kind of current day and in the near term have an impact. So I was convinced when I went there that there was going to be some application for this technology. Is it going to be all of us flying to work in our flying cars? I don't think so for a very long time, but there's going to be lots of business cases where this gets picked up. And my research is focused on noise. So my first instinct was, okay, you want to have 1,000 of these things flying over cities and landing in the most densely populated urban city centers in the country. Noise is going to be a big problem. You know, one helicopter flying over your house at night, you know, if you're still up, you'll hear it for sure. And if you're not up, it might wake you up. And so, you know, this symposium was in Los Angeles, where you actually have a lot of helicopter traffic. And it was really interesting because the weather was nice. We'd be outside talking about all this technology, and then a helicopter would fly over and everybody would stop talking and just kind of look at it and then look back at each other and go, oh yeah, noise is a big problem, right? And that's just one helicopter. So if you're talking hundreds or thousands of these things, it's going to be a big issue. So my background, my research is in propulsion, which historically has been jet propulsion, anything related to the energy to move the vehicle through the air. And now kind of going into this realm with electrically driven aircraft propulsion, there's a lot that's different about the design of these propulsion systems in terms of the aerodynamics and the noise. And you mentioned aeroacoustics earlier, and that's really one of my expertise. Aeroacoustics means acoustics generated from aerodynamic phenomenon. So the air on these propulsors is what's actually the source of the noise. And we have to do a lot of work to try to reduce that noise through, you know, our advanced engineering of the propeller blades and how we put them on the aircraft.
So those are things that, you know, when you're a policymaker, you don't really, that's not the first stuff that comes to your mind. And I think these are really important issues that we're going to have to deal with. So I appreciate that very much. Elaine, you've got a long history in the military. They seem to be very interested in building out this industry. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that and also about this organization called Agility Prime.
Sure. So yeah, I served 20 years in the Air Force, blessed to have served and actually used some of my degrees in both aerospace and aeronautical engineering. And so it's really exciting to be able to continue to work on this on the community side. But in terms of Agility Prime is a program under started by AFWorks. So AFWorks is the innovation cell within the Air Force that's now located under the Air Force Research Labs. And the purpose of Agility Prime is to push the envelope on technologies. And really, it's a national security imperative. So Agility Prime recognizes that 10, 15 years ago, when the UAV, UAS industry was starting up, there were folks that were interested here in the US, but that market really moved overseas. And so if you look at your drones that you have for your kids or your grandkids, or maybe they're yours, most of those parts are made in China, right? And so it's very difficult to source US. And as part of some of the reshoring we're doing, some of those things, we're looking to bring them back. But what the Air Force recognized was they did not want this eVTOL flying car industry to move overseas for that manufacturing piece I talked about earlier, or for subcomponents, parts, and things like that. So seeing this as a national security imperative, the Department of Defense and the Air Force went ahead and actually they've partnered with NASA as well for Agility Prime. And what they did is they reached out to these OEMs, these Henry Fords of the flying cars, and said, hey, we want to work with you because we want to help you reduce the risk that you have in terms of getting these vehicles airworthy. And we also want to be able to allow you to use some of our test resources, again, to drive down some of that cost, reduce risk. And then, of course, for those of you who are familiar, so this was done through the use of small business innovation research dollars. So that's the partnerships that they formed with these OEMs. So in terms of what Agility Prime, so Agility Prime kicked off basically in March of 2020. The industry has grown significantly. There were 6 prime companies they were working with. 3 of them are already moving operations to the Ohio region, and we're super excited about that. But just in that year, what Agility Prime did for this advanced air mobility market has been very significant. So it was a market and an industry that was growing and it was getting there, but by backing it by the Air Force and with DoD dollars, it really advanced them and it gave confidence to these OEMs that, hey, not only are there commercial applications for this, but on their horizons, there could also be some defense applications as well. So it was really pushing that dual use commercialization and also the defense. And obviously, in addition to that commercialization where you could buy them, but now we want to push the envelope for the industrialization of this market. So it's really exciting what the Air Force and Agility Prime has done for it. And many of our companies and universities across the state have partnered with the Air Force and Agility Prime. Last summer, we partnered with, as Rich said, it's a team sport. So Jobs Ohio, OFRN, ODOT, all of us, there was a lot of matchmaking. So Ohio was the #1 state for Agility Prime contracts or SBIR contracts out of the whole country for that. So that was huge for us. And we're going to continue to do that as we see more Agility Prime dollars coming that will be available from the Air Force.
So I think this is a really important point. And when the military is involved, when the Air Force is involved, it really shows you how real this industry is. They're a great catalyst for this. So, I mean, again, it's not pie in the sky things we're talking about. This is a real opportunity for Ohio to become a leader, and the Air Force has got it, is backing it. So it's important.
Yeah, and Jay, if I could just piggyback on that, as we've been interacting with many of these companies through all those entities that I mentioned across the state, one of the things that the OEMs that are here and working with us, the multiple OEMs already working with us, their feedback is, we are so happy that Ohio even knows what this is. You know, I think we'll probably talk a little bit later about what the other states are doing, but you know, some of them come from states where their economic development folks don't even know what advanced air mobility is or what they're talking about, let alone be able to have a conversation as knowledgeable as the ones that we have when we talk to these OEMs and about the capabilities we have across the state. So the Air Force, I'll quote a little bit, said, Ohio is the model for how this private, public, community partnerships are supposed to work. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and hopefully through Digital Futures, we're going to educate that base of knowledge too a little bit further too. Rich, you know, this is really exciting. As I said, you know, the Air Force is behind this, so there's going to be opportunities. We know that. But whenever new industries are created, there's a potential for new jobs. What is the state of Ohio doing to prepare this workforce?
No, let's talk about jobs. That's a great question. And to put it into context and to build on what Elaine was just talking about, what are the jobs? What are we talking about? And then I'll also talk about a lot of the amazing job and workforce development resources systematically that are in place in Ohio and how we're bringing that in all together here. So when you talk about Agility Prime, I think about the race to ground mobility about 15 or 20 years ago, where again, DARPA, a different group of the Department of Defense, stepped in with these DARPA challenges. You saw teams from Carnegie Mellon and Stanford and MIT and a few others winning these challenges. And the winners of those competitions are now the CEOs and CTOs of all these self-driving vehicle startups that you're hearing about. So the magic that's happening here in Ohio is we're doing the same thing, and it's happening here in this state. So 15 years from now, the leaders of these companies that'll become household names, we think will be working inside this Ohio ecosystem. And what we say is come here to test and stay here to grow. That's what our message is to all these smart mobility companies. So when you talk about the jobs that come out of this, when Dan was talking about the differences in this technology, I mean, in a lot of ways, what you need to do is build a higher volume of aircraft. You're essentially building cars and planes in the same facility, to put it, fairly simplistically. If only there was a state that was good at building cars and aircraft. Oh, wait a minute, that's Ohio. That's where we are, right? So we're ready to go. But it's now you get into the nuance of, well, exactly what jobs? If you're designing and building these, you're talking about new skills in engineering and manufacturing. If you're operating and maintaining these aircraft, you're talking about new skills for pilots. You're talking about new skills for aircraft maintenance, repair, and overhaul technicians. So it hits the whole supply chain. So we got to be ready for this. And so when we do workforce development at Drive Ohio and Fly Ohio, we take a holistic approach to this. We talk about upskilling today's workforce. We talk about preparing the next generation workforce in higher ed and career technical. And then we talk about engaging our youngest learners from pre-K up to high school. So for upskilling in this space, we're talking about, right now, things like FAA Part 107 certificates, that's sort of the entry point, but there's a lot more coming. And so, pilots and jobs of that sort, we're just on the leading edge of that. When you talk about preparing, David Adams mentioned the amazing Vertiport Innovation Challenge that Fly Ohio held with the Cincinnati Innovation District last weekend. And we can unpack that later and get into more detail, but we've got students engaged on designing the next generation infrastructure. We're doing capstone projects. The Ohio Federal Research Network is doing amazing work funding research in these areas. So you've got a mixture of faculty, research, and students working on this. And then in the engaging side of things with K-12, we're getting ready to launch some Fly Ohio student teams this year, capture students' imagination, while we're also talking about industry recognized credentials and things going to Ohio Tech Cred. So we could go on, but there's a lot that we're getting started on. And again, we want to be #1 in the country for this workforce topic, not just for the technology side of it.
I'm glad I asked you that question. The energy just came through the screen there. So that's fantastic. Dan, Fly Ohio and UC and others have collaborated on an economic impact study, which has not been released yet. I'm wondering if you can give us a little preview of what's going to be in that study and what it's going to tell us.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. I'm really sort of like a fly on the wall when it comes to economics. But yeah, so this study is a collaborative study being led by Crown Consulting in North Carolina, and then Nexa Capital Partners and University of Cincinnati, with the team of Dr. Kelly Cohen, who runs the UAV Master Lab at UC. And he's been, involved in, unmanned air systems for a long time, and Brian Kowalczyk, who works in that group as well. And then myself, I'm sort of consulting on the noise aspect. But a lot of this study was focused on, and I'll keep it brief because the study will come out, I believe, next month. It'll be delivered to ODOT, and then it'll be up on their website. But really, kind of, they focused on a couple main areas. One is, what are the use cases for this technology? How are we going to use it? And some of the main drivers are going to be emergency services, which is what we use helicopters for currently, and approve having them fly over our neighborhoods, as noisy as they are, if it's emergency services. And then air taxi, kind of getting in and around cities. So imagine, 4 to 6 people can hop on one of these things, and you take off vertically right in the middle of the city, and you fly either to another part of the city or to the airport. To take a jet to your further destination. And then I think one of the most interesting things, and also cargo, so small and large cargo, everything from last mile delivery to, maybe larger, payload deliveries in between, from a hub. Amazon has a hub in the Northern Kentucky Airport region, I believe, and I think transportation to smaller, more remote areas in a more timely fashion could be a major use case. And then regional transport, so going to and from the larger cities. And one of the most interesting things I find is these are the things that are hard to predict when it comes to economic impact, is connecting some of the more rural and the further out suburban regions to the urban city centers where maybe there's more economic opportunity. And if there are shuttles that can bring the workforce in, if it's for maintenance, repair operations, or any other business case, it could really start to sort of shrink those distances in terms of economic opportunity for people that maybe live further from the city centers. So those are kind of the use cases. And another main thing they focused on is the jobs that are going to be created from this, and it's extensive. Everything from manufacturing, which Rich mentioned, maintenance, repair operations. That's humongous in aerospace. I mean, General Electric takes a loss on every aircraft engine they sell, and they make 90% of their profit from parts replacements and the repair operations on those engines. That's just sort of the business model for these very expensive systems. Infrastructure, construction of all that infrastructure, construction of all the vertiports, small, large, modifications to existing buildings and city centers so that these vehicles can land on top of buildings, on top of parking structures. And then also, it trickles down to many other indirect jobs like pilots and drivers and retail and all the food services and all the charging infrastructure that's going to have to be built and operated. And so they're looking at, I think David mentioned 20,000 jobs by 2030, and I think this type of this study is going to show that there will be significant contributions towards that goal, and without getting any specific numbers. And then tax revenues are going to be huge as well for the state and for the city regions for operating all these new businesses. And that's not anything to kind of overlook. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars over a year, up to into the billions over 25 years. So pretty big numbers there.
Rich, anything you want to add on this as you represent Fly Ohio and ODOT on this?
I would just say that, the three of the benefits and outcomes we see coming out of this study: one is to accelerate what we're already doing with infrastructure. Two is to continue attracting industry here to show that, we aren't just familiar with this industry, as Elaine said, we're going like several levels deeper to say what are all the dimensions that are needed. So this becomes another tool in the toolbox for economic development. And third, I would say, it informs what we do with policies and investments, and that can be investment in infrastructure. It can be, just this week, Jobs Ohio announced an amazing new fund to support startups, and you've got all this great investment happening. So I think those are many of the ways we're going to use this as another tool in the toolbox.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And Jay, if I could just piggyback to Rich's comment in terms of it being a tool, it's also to inform our policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels, so that they now clearly have the dollar figures behind that. So when we're talking about it with as much passion as Rich and I and Dan talk about it, we now have facts and data to back it up. And I think that's going to be huge.
Facts and data are huge. I absolutely agree with that. Elaine, I'm going to stay with you then too. So I've got a question from the audience. What are the most crucial steps to achieving a vision of advanced air mobility vehicles being used to transport people and goods in Cincinnati and other urban areas in Ohio? When are we going to see that?
Well, so we're expecting so we have had a flying car here in Springfield, Ohio. As of last month, we did get one very short test flight out of it before they moved it. We are looking forward to, in the next month or two, a company out of Vermont, Beta Technologies, will be making a not quite cross-country flight, but cross-country flight from Vermont to Ohio. And we are hoping to get more charging stations for their vehicles. So we have one in Springfield, one is going into Akron, and we would love to have one in Cincinnati as well. And so they're being very aggressive with their network of charging stations, which, by the way, these charging stations will not only be able to be used for their vehicle, the Aliyah, but also for other electric vehicles as well. So think of the car charging stations that we have that you can use for multiple vehicles. So in terms of time frame, I think especially with efforts like Rich Granger's the vertiport challenges and things, I think we're going to be seeing this. I'm going to be conservative and say within the next 3 years, where you will see this very connected system of charging stations and vertiports throughout Ohio. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but one of the NASA challenge that we're working on as a state will also help to bring that as well within that 3-year time frame.
What exactly does a charging station look like when you're talking about advanced air mobility? I mean, I know what a car charging station looks like. They've come into our, our consciousness in recent years, but is it similar?
Very similar. Just think of a little gas pump. The hose is much longer, but it just looks like a gas pump. This company in particular, Beta, is very keen on both air and ground. And so they actually installed both a car charging and a vehicle charging at Springfield Station there. We're hoping that as the restrictions for gatherings and things like that, we can start to have folks come out and see it. And then, of course, as I mentioned, even more important, we want to see this across the state. And Fred Judson at the Ohio UAS Center from ODOT as well, he's working with our plan to get this across the state. And one of those things is the vertiports and the charging stations.
Sounds good. Vertiport. New words. I love new words in the lexicon. I love it. Dan, researchers, you guys are often identifying problems that you've got to solve. What are the obstacles you're seeing to make this industry a success in the state and the country?
Yeah, that's a much longer conversation than what we have time for in terms of what are the challenges going to be. But as a researcher, you kind of have to be part optimist, part pessimist, and realistic. And one of my first takeaways from the numbers that Uber was claiming was that for this to be economically viable, you have to have thousands of flights per day per city, which doesn't sound like that much. 1,000, like that seems manageable. Well, if you kind of do some quick research in terms of our current air system, CVG in Cincinnati has about 180 flights departing a day. Atlanta Airport has about 2,500 and about 5,700 across the entire country. So if you're talking about hundreds to thousands of flights per city per day over all the major cities in the United States, you're talking about a lot of flights. And so air traffic control, air traffic management, I think is a massive hurdle. My interest is in noise, which is also a complicated physics problem, but air traffic control is a very, very complicated problem, as everybody's probably aware of. And so to do that, a lot of it has to be almost fully automated. And that's what Dr. Cohen's group and many others are working on, what's called UTM, unmanned traffic management. And there's often, let's kind of take a step back. There's unmanned flying systems and then possibly piloted flying systems. Drones and all of those things are unmanned, right? They're only 50 pounds. You can't put a person on them. These air taxis are envisioned to be piloted at first. They're complex. They're going to have to operate in complex environments, landing on top of buildings or vertiports, right? Programming all that in to be automated at first is going to be a big challenge. But the long-term vision is that you can get the pilot out of the seat by automating a lot of this, which will also drive the cost down and make the cost per mile much more affordable. So when you don't have to pay 10,000 pilots a day across the country to fly these vehicles. So air traffic control automation is a major hurdle and issue to overcome. But in terms of the vehicle, the battery technology is enormous, making the batteries safe, ensuring they have enough power to fly the flight, that you have redundant, power electronics systems on there. This is kind of a new realm for many aerospace engineers. We generally think about fuel and air, and we don't think about electronics and power electronics. And when you come in and you study aerospace engineering, I had professors tell me, okay, take your chemistry book, you can throw that away. Take your electricity, magnetism book, you can get rid of that. You won't need those books. And those were both completely wrong assumptions. When you get into combustion, you need to know chemistry. When you get into this area now and many other areas before, you need to know electronics and things like that. But you know, I've been working with high power electronics and motors, and it's complicated, and I've made plenty of mistakes, and that's how I've learned. So you know, the battery technology, the power electronics, air traffic, and then you know, my personal favorite is the noise that's generated from these. And by switching to an electric motor driven system, they're much quieter, and most people can probably make that observation between a a large truck and a Tesla or a Prius. You know, there is some noise there, but it's kind of in the high frequency realm. And one major just high level point, high frequencies get absorbed in the atmosphere much more quickly than low frequencies. So if you think about a jet aircraft that is flying over, you can hear that low rumble sound, but you don't really hear the high frequency noise unless you're standing on the tarmac right next to the aircraft, right? That's because that noise gets dissipated or absorbed in the atmosphere. And so you almost completely get rid of the engine noise for these vehicles, and the rest of it comes from the props and the airframe of the vehicle.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Those are, I'm also glad to hear that UC is at the forefront of a lot of these questions too. So shameless plug for UC here. Rich, I've got another cute question from the audience. This is about workforce again. So Digital Futures, it borders the neighborhood. The actual building is going to be bordering the neighborhood of Avondale, which is a primarily African-American neighborhood. One of our goals is to make sure that our efforts are helping all Ohioans. How are we going to be able to make sure that minorities and disadvantaged communities are benefiting from this new industry?
Jay, thanks for the question. I couldn't agree more that it's such an important topic. We take diversity, inclusion, and equity incredibly seriously at Drive Ohio. Just as one example, right now, 100% of our interns are from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. And I think that's one example of how having a seat at the table at the beginning is one of many ways to address that important question. So when I say that, I mean, as we're defining use cases, we're talking about improved access to healthcare, improved access to food. Those use cases will benefit everyone. And so we are making sure that we're tilting towards these use cases that resonate with community challenges and looking at these technologies as an opportunity to reimagine solutions to these pervasive, sometimes we call them wicked problems that have been around for a long time. And how can we use the technology to finally maybe break through in a way that we haven't been able to before? And so maybe as an example of that, we baked in equity and equitable solutions as a key requirement for our Vertiport Innovation Challenge that we co-hosted with Cincinnati Innovation District last weekend. And the winning team talked about transportation of blood, because the blood supply can be so low in the healthcare network that it's just this use case that quickly benefits everybody. And then they talked about laddering up to more complex use case scenarios like organ transplant, things like that. So healthcare in general is emerging as a very early use case for this technology, which we think has strong benefits for everyone. And then as you think about things like food access and eventually movement of goods and things like that, that opens up other opportunities. And I would just say another dimension besides having a robust, holistic conversation about use cases is also talking about jobs. Making sure that everything we do with workforce development is bringing everyone to the table. And that's where our K-12 outreach is at least one example where we're again, tilting towards communities that maybe don't get as much STEM education outreach as they might need. We're trying to overcorrect for that with some of these programs that we're setting up. And those are just a few examples of the work we're trying to do on that very important topic.
Well, look, it's clear that you're keeping it at the forefront too, and if you do, then we're going to have success there. So I appreciate that very much. Got another question from the audience. I'm going to ask this to Elaine. So there are some serious conversations around Hyperloop, Elaine. I don't know if Hyperloop, if you ever listened to those conversations. I know that the Cincinnati Airport's involved in some of those conversations, especially around freight. Wanted to know, do you view that as any of this as competition? Are you looking at this as an issue for advanced air mobility to partner with it? Any thoughts around that?
Jay, so just so I'm clear, because I'm not familiar with the term Hyperloop, but is that the ground or train type of transportation?
That's that propulsion view, the way in which they move people and goods very quickly through different, and I'm not going to.
Yeah, Hyperloop is, if I may interject, is imagine an evacuated tube. So you pull vacuum, you suck all the air out of it, you put the vehicle on magnetic levitation and then you shoot it through tubes at, what would be supersonic speeds, but there's no air, there's no air, you don't really generate shockwaves. So you can go very quickly, very efficiently, but it requires massive infrastructure to like build tunnels and pump out all the air and everything there. But yeah, kind of Elon Musk's brainchild.
Gotcha, Dan. Thank you for that. Well, and that's why I was wondering if it was connected to the trains, because we did get a question on, folks trying to push for, trains and other types of transportation, which this seems to fall in there. And Dan, you hit it on the spot, is the infrastructure piece, right? So we are going to need infrastructure for this advanced air mobility, but it would not be as significant as what it sounds like this Hyperloop might be, or maybe even train and more ground transportation. So in a lot of these cases, especially with the medical use cases, we'll be able to leverage a lot of the helipads, turn those into vertiports and things like that, especially at the hospitals. But yeah, I think in terms of cost, that's where we would see that. Now, in terms of competition, I would say that we're probably open to partnering because, as a state, we are looking at this as a ground and air strategy. So we're not just looking at it from the air. We, Fly Ohio and Drive Ohio, as Rich mentioned, they're both under ODOT. And with Jobs Ohio, we partnered with them to really start to market Ohio for what we're saying is smart mobility or just advanced mobility. So we are looking at, the TRC, the Route 33, all the things that are going on the ground, very much looking at it as a synergistic applicability to what's going on in the air so that we have both capabilities.
So that's really, so David Adams and I were actually talking yesterday about how policymakers, sometimes you view it as an or, we do one or the other and not as the and you're saying that the latter, which I think is positive for the state. So appreciate it. Dan, I'm going to come back to you.
Can I just kind of add on to that a little bit? So I think Hyperloop and air mobility they're solving two different problems. Hyperloop, in terms of any ground transport, you can always take more mass, more weight, right? It's not that difficult. That's why we transport everything on tractor trailers. And air mobility is more about, ease of access, quick transportation, but you're never going to get the kind of payloads on an aircraft that you could on a ground transportation unit. So like Elaine was sort of alluding to, like a partnership or sort of a synergy between, these multimodal transport methods is really probably the best way to look at it. But Hyperloop and air mobility, I would argue, are both sort of pushing the limits of technology as we use them today.
All right, thanks. And I'm going to stay with you now too. I want you to tell me what you're seeing other states doing. Yeah, I know you've had some observations around that.
Yeah, and I think
what can we learn from them?
Funding, right? Money. It seems to be very closely tied to money, and Ohio's putting, I think quite a lot of money towards, some pretty good efforts. I can really kind of speak to a couple just observations I've had, especially the states that have very, highly populous cities. So New York, Texas, California have been sort of on the forefront, at least in the news, in terms of what they're doing in terms of partnerships. So signing Space Act agreements with NASA seems to be a very good way forward. I heard Elaine mention something with NASA earlier. Maybe she can kind of respond on what Ohio's doing, to kind of keep in the loop with NASA, who's really driving a lot of the initiatives around air mobility. But a couple, I think some of these companies, the states are partnering with companies to sort of say, hey, we're going to be, we can run test operations and flight tests and sort of, trial runs in our cities. And so partnering to kind of have them test their technologies here in Ohio, which sounds like what we're starting to do is really good. One thing that really, from the noise perspective that I saw that I found very interesting was, where you fly these things matters. So if you fly over quiet areas, rural areas or suburban areas, the noise of the vehicles will be perceived more. You can hear them over the background noise. Whereas if you're, somewhere near a commercial or like a highway, which, the noise levels are higher around there, you might not be able to actually perceive the vehicle in that soundscape. And I believe there was the state of Texas did an acoustic mapping of the city of Dallas to measure the sound levels around the cities to determine where are sort of the avenues that they could fly these vehicles in initially before the noise levels come down to where they need to be, so that you can sort of mask the sound of the vehicles in the background noise. And that's going to be very important to understanding when and where you could or should fly these vehicles initially, so that you don't disturb the communities. And sort of another point I wanted to make along the lines of what you and Rich were talking about with equity and inclusion, and Avondale being very near kind of the Digital Futures building. I'm looking at noise from the perspective of sort of, societal impact. So when helicopters or air traffic is flying over cities currently, they tend to route them over, less economically advantaged areas. You can see that in Los Angeles when the planes all come in and they fly over Inglewood and Compton, and they come and land at the airport, and the property values are all suppressed there. There's a lot of emissions coming from the aircraft, and that's a concern for the communities that these aircraft are flying over, especially if there's a high volume of traffic. So we solved the emissions problem by going electric, which is great. But really, if you're going to be flying these things all around the cities, they could have a very negative impact on the communities in terms of noise. And so the way that I'm looking at it is that these vehicles have to be imperceptible in the environments they fly in. Otherwise, somebody's going to have to take the brunt of that impact.
Another hugely important issue for our policymakers to deal with too. Elaine, Dan mentioned NASA again too in the conversation, and you talked about it a little bit earlier too. Maybe you can expound on that. And what is NASA doing in the space?
Absolutely. Well, ODOT and Fly Ohio have been working very closely with the NASA folks on the urban traffic management, mentioned some of our corridors already here in the state. But right now, what we're really pushing for is a collaboration partnership with NASA for a 3-year project to look at, it's called NASA's Campaign Challenge, the national campaign, NASA's national campaign for advanced air mobility. I'll make sure I get that right. And basically it's identifying vertiport locations, looking at use cases over that 3-year period. And right now we are looking at the 3 Cs for that partnership, and also looking at Dayton, Toledo, and Akron as some of the other minor hubs, looking to initially focus on that medical use case or the medical package delivery more specifically. How can we do multiple eVTOL OEM flights with different companies? And the big thing is, and I know Dan talked about what is what are the things the challenges for this industry. This national campaign will also look at community acceptance. That's one of the big drivers. So we could fix all the technological things and the noise and things like that, but we also have to have people who accept it and want to get in these flying cars or want their stuff delivered via these things. So that's coming up right now. We're putting in as a state, again, another example of statewide collaboration on this project. And we're hoping to have Ohio be picked up as part of this NASA National Challenge for Advanced Air Mobility. So a lot of exciting things going on there.
Efficacy in the system, that's important. That's right.
Yeah.
Rich, how do you view your collaboration with research universities? We're sitting here at a tier 1 research university. How do you guys think about that state?
Sure. So I think I've referenced a few examples that I can maybe expand on a little bit. We look at engagements with students, whether that's even before they arrive on campus or anytime during their campus journey. That work-based learning through capstones and internships, we can help to foster those with our partners or even hire them ourselves. And then the innovation challenges, like we talked about, are some great ways to engage with students. On the research side, I've mentioned it a few times already, but the Ohio Federal Research Network has an outstanding program called Soaring. The current round 5 is under review, and we hear nothing but wonderful feedback from both participants and industry stakeholders, and even people outside of Ohio. Just really buzzing around the work that OFRN is doing as an example of directing a lot of the research funding in a strategic way towards this ecosystem that we're building out. So I think those are just a few examples of some of the frameworks we put in place, and we are wide open for partnerships and ideas. And so anyone who's listening today is welcome to reach out to us, and we're glad to brainstorm new ideas too.
Perfect, Rich. I'm sure people will take you up on that. Running out of time here, so I want a couple more questions. Dan, this is a question for you that came in just for you. What kind of partnering needs to happen ideally to make Ohio a leader in the space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I sometimes I'm a little head down in the technical weeds. So in terms of thinking, big picture, I think a lot of the things that Drive Ohio and the state and the Air Force are doing are good. They're drumming up excitement. They're getting companies involved. Personally, I would like to see more money going towards fundamental research in this space. There are a lot of I always tell my students, engineers, you're going to always have safe employment because you're always inventing new problems to solve. Like you create a solution, you create 100 new problems. So, the problems that are going to be faced for getting these vehicles certified, ensuring they're airworthy, is going to be based in the fundamental aerodynamics and controllability of these aircraft. If you've seen some videos of these things flying, the initial concepts, they don't look that stable at first, right? They're kind of flopping around, oscillating around because it's a completely new configuration of vehicles. So there's a ton of engineering work and research that needs to go in on that side. Whereas currently it's sort of being pumped into, the companies and agreements, which I think is one part of the problem. But also we have to attract those companies to the state of Ohio, which I know is a massive ordeal. If you look at Joby Aviation, who's arguably the leader, they're out in California, kind of in the Bay Area, but their plan is to build their manufacturing hub in Monterey, California, which to me, I'm like, why would you build manufacturing in Monterey, California? It's one of the most expensive places to live in the country. So somebody has to work on convincing them to manufacture more elsewhere in the country. But it's sort of like the SpaceX model with these startups, is they want to do it all kind of in-house to keep costs down. We have to figure out how to get that spread out a bit more.
Let's bring it to Ohio. I agree. Let's do that. Elaine, we're going to end with you. You've got the last word. Where are we going from here? And also, how can the people watching get involved in this industry?
Absolutely. Well, first off, just again, a thank you for this opportunity to my colleagues, Rich and Dan. This is super exciting to be partnered with all of you and those of you listening, because this is a monumental time for our state. And Dan, we're working on those bubbles. We want them all here. Again, we don't want them to just come here and fly for a little bit and then leave. We want to keep them here. And so that's definitely what we're working on as a complete team, whether it's Jobs Ohio, ODOT, or for our University of Cincinnati partnerships, 1819 and innovation. We are at the forefront of it. There are other states competing, but we are just as well equipped, if not more equipped. There's other things we're doing that just not enough time to cover here. But just know that if you want to be part of this third revolution in flight and leading the way for Ohio, reach out to any of us, to myself. Again, I'm working the military and federal sector for Jobs Ohio, and I'm at the Dayton Development Coalition. I'm Rich at ODOT, and Dan at the University of Cincinnati. Just reach out to us. Jay, if you want to share our emails, I'm happy to discuss. And it's not just about us three. We will connect you to the right people, because there's so many people working on this vision and the strategy to make and keep Ohio #1 here. And we're getting a lot of attention. And one last note, look out for a marketing campaign that ODOT and Jobs Ohio will be releasing in the month of April. To basically, so when you Google advanced air mobility and these keywords, Ohio is going to be what comes up. And then we'll be able to talk about all the things that we're doing that we just hit the tip of the iceberg here today. So it's an exciting time, and we'd love for all of you to be on this journey with us.
I love it when we're on the ground floor of something exciting. I want to thank Elaine, Rich, and Dan for joining us today on our 4th Flashpoint series. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a ton. I'm going to continue trying to learn about this because it's so exciting for the state. There are going to be more Flashpoint series panels shown throughout the day, and this conversation is going to be archived for your viewing pleasure. I also want to say we'll put up another plug in for another panel later on today at 1 p.m. Jennifer Kravickas and Pat Limbach will be giving you an introduction to digital futures and all that it entails. So I hope you tune in. I'm going to. Thanks again for joining us on this Research and Innovation Week Flashpoint panel. Thank you.